Today, Doc and I are having a look at some projected starting lineups. We're still very early, but we'll go through our projected starting lineups for the Eastern Conference, having a look at who is going to be fantasy relevant, who may start later in the season. Lots to discuss. Let's go balls deep.
I could bet all of the riches that I ever had.
Welcome to the Balls Deep Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Fantasy Basketball International. FBIBasketball.com is the website. At AdamKing91 is where you will find me on X or Twitter. At Doctora is where you will find my co-host. Steve, how are things? What's been going on since last week?
Not a lot. Had a wedding anniversary today. Played some Yahtzee. Played some golf. Watched some Braves. Braves are losing right now. Other than that, pretty chill. My daughter, her birthday was on August 6th, and she got to go to Wrigley Field in Chicago to see the Cubs and Braves play. So that was a pretty cool experience for her.
And you did not go, I'm assuming?
I chose to skip that adventure.
Yes.
A lot of driving for a little bit of reward.
Yes. So we chatted, I think it was off air about that, and actually chatted a little bit about something which I thought we'd just touch on very quickly before we jump into the basketball stuff. I'm actually planning a trip to the States in October. So we'll be landing basically opening night, working our way around a few cities, watching some games. And Indiana is on our list of possibles, probables. We're still deciding on a few places. But and we spoke very briefly about you grew up in Indiana. You know a bit about that. And I don't know, let's take this opportunity for you to speak up on Indiana and promote it as a city to visit and convince me to go there. What can I do in Indiana?
Yeah, well, I haven't been there since it became cool. When I left, it was kind of, they called it Nap Town because Indianapolis. And it was such a sleepy town. There wasn't a lot going on, but man, they got that Super Bowl in 2008, maybe 2004. They had a Super Bowl and they opened up downtown and they put in a bunch of stuff and you can pretty much go and stay anywhere you want to downtown and be within walking distance of everything that you could want to do, including famous St. Elmo's Steakhouse with the shrimp cocktail that is world famous. Every time there's a big game in Indy, that's where all the broadcasters go, and that's where all the players go. So, but no, it's actually become a really cool, small, modern city. I don't know what it looks like exactly today because I haven't been back there in 5 years, and there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since then, but from everything I can tell, it's still a pretty cool place. I think if you guys go catch a Pacers game in Indy, you will have a good time.
Yeah, look, it feels like a city that myself and the guy that I'm going with, neither of us are really into the big over-the-top cities with thousands, millions of people. We would prefer things to be a little bit more laid back. Pacers are a fun team. We'll talk about them shortly, about their starting lineup and some other guys they've got. So we're looking forward to heading over there, and it is looking like we'll go to Indiana and potentially head up to watch. Well, you guys say Notre Dame, we say Notre Dame over here, but a college game. We'd probably like to head up there as well, and maybe drive out to. I spoke with Alex Barutha from RotoWire last week, I think, and A few of the guys who work for RotoWire, I've met them in Las Vegas a few years ago. So we're potentially going to drive from Indiana out to Madison, and I think it's about 5 hours, roughly. Am I right there?
That sounds about right. Maybe 6.
Yeah.
Alex and I work pretty closely together these days. Like, I talk to him a lot. I'm doing player outlooks just like you are for RotoWire, and so I spent time talking to Alex. I was not aware he was in Madison, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's sort of like Indiana. It's sort of Midwest, a lot of cheese, a lot of cows, a lot of but it's, Madison's a fun, that's a good college town. And that'll be quite a trip for a guy from Australia who has never been to the Midwest before.
Yeah, look, it's I think the guy that I'm going with has driven over there before, because of course it's all on the wrong side of the road for me. So we're going to probably avoid Chicago, because I think he said you can either go through Chicago or you can bypass it. I'm probably going to choose to bypass it, simply for the fact I don't want to have to deal with big intersections and traffic lights and
well,
things
and
like that.
The bottom line is Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Boston. Like, those are probably the 5 worst cities to try to drive in the United States. And Chicago is a big one. And that's part of the reason I didn't go on that whole adventure with my daughter, is I just didn't want to, it's 10 hours to get from where I am to Indianapolis. And it's another 4 to Chicago, another 4 home after the game. I just didn't feel like dealing with it. But to your Notre Dame trip, I can speak to this. In 1988, when the Irish were undefeated and won the national championship, my buddy and I drove from southern Indiana to Notre Dame for a football game. We saw them play Penn State at Notre Dame. And it was 1988, and I had 2 cassette tapes in my Ford Escort for that entire trip, which was it was like 5 hours there and 5 hours back. I had REM Green, which had just come out, and I had the Traveling Wilburys. And those were the 2 albums that we listened to on repeat for that entire road trip. So I knew both of those albums by heart by the time we got home. Those are 2 good albums to have if you're locked in a car for 2 days. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it could have been worse, but I guess you would have known all of the songs back to front by the time you got
Yes,
home.
we did.
Right. Let's get into some fantasy stuff. Let me just get rid of that. We don't need that blocking stuff. So I've gone through and just sort of come up with my projected starters. These could change. There could be a bit of flexibility here. As I said, we're still more than 2 months away from the start of the season. So this is what I'm thinking. And then we've got some players that may or may not be relevant. So I've gone with the Hawks, your Hawks. I've gone with Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, Sadiq Bey, and Clint Capella as the starters. I would really love if they started Jalen Johnson over Sadiq Bey, but I don't think it's going to happen. Is this in line with what you think they'll do on opening night?
Yeah, it is. I think at some point this season, Onyeka Okongwu is going to challenge Clint Capella for that starting job. And maybe a Capella injury will make it happen. Maybe just the way they're both playing will make it happen. Maybe at some point they'll play the 2 of them together a little bit. But at some point, Okongwu has got to crack that lineup.
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be at least a timeshare. We saw that towards the end of last season. Both are going to be draftable guys, top 100, I would say. Thoughts on Sadiq Bey this season? I mean, he's decent. He was okay when he went to Atlanta last year, but I don't really see him as a guy we need to be targeting in fantasy. Would you agree with that?
I mean, the thing about Sadiq Bey, he's only been in the league for 4 years, or 3 years. Like, he's at the age 24 where he could actually break out and do something to shock us. It hasn't happened yet. He's not really a big steals guy. He's not a big blocks guy. He's decent with 3-pointers. His shooting, very suspect. I feel like he's a good rebounder for his size. But I'm with you. I feel like Jalen Johnson is going to push him quite a bit this year. Like, I'm not targeting Sadiq Bey in standard leagues.
No, I think if you final round of your draft, if you just need points and threes, then maybe you could just throw him in there, because if he's going to play 30 minutes, he'll get you sort of 15 points and a couple of threes. But as you said, he's not very efficient. Okay,
And
on
then-
to Boston.
Well, like, we got to talk about Trae Young real quick. Like, half of Atlanta, I feel like, is ready to run him out of town. There's all this talk about him not getting along with his teammates. He was a first-round fantasy guy the last couple of years. Like, where are you targeting Trae Young? Does he bounce back after kind of a lackluster season last year? Can him and DeJounte exist together? Where are you with the Trae DeJounte thing?
Yeah, look, I'm just pulling up my rankings to see actually where I have him in my rankings. I have him at 20 in my rankings. I've seen him. I feel like he's probably going to creep up as we get towards closer to draft season because of his assists upside. I think anyone that's averaging close to 10 assists is going to have a lot of value in fantasy. They always do. He finished outside the top 50 last season in 9 category leagues, but I mean, again, if you don't factor in turnovers there, he goes way up. But 26 points, 10 assists, a steal, 2 threes. Look, I think I'm okay with taking him in the second round. And then I'd probably look to get DeJounte Murray in the third round if possible, which I think lines up with sort of where he finished last season. And my rankings, where do I have him? I actually have him at 40, so I have him a little bit lower in my rankings. But what about you? Is Trae Young a first round guy for you, or someone that can fall a little bit?
No, he used to be. I mean, if DeJounte wasn't there, if the vibe around Atlanta was still more positive than it is right now about Trae, I think he could. I mean, Trae's one of those guys, that round table thing we wrote the other day. Easily, I don't know if anybody wrote about Trae Young or not, but they could have, because he was a 5th rounder last year and DeJounte was the 3rd rounder. Trae underperformed a little bit, but the core numbers are still there. Like you said, the 20 something points and the 10 assists and the 3-pointers. It's all still there. But can he build on that to get higher than, 4th round value? I don't know if he can. I'm probably laying off a Trae this year.
I think for him, the main thing I think we need to look at with Trae is efficiency, because he was 51 last season with the numbers that I mentioned. The year before, 28 points, 10 assists, a steal, 3 threes, 46% from the field. Last season, he was 43%. So if he can simply get that efficiency back up to 45, 46%, that means his 3-pointers probably go up, his points go up a little bit, and he could quite easily jump inside the top 25, top 20 without too much trouble.
I think he'll be taken between 25 and 30 in most leagues.
Yeah, I haven't got the ADP data, but that feels about right at the moment. Onto Boston, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. I think they're set. I think we know those 3 will start. They've come out and said White will start. The question, Porzingis is going to start. The question is who starts alongside him. I've got Horford as the starter with Rob Williams coming off the bench. It could be the other way around. It could be Williams starting. Any thoughts from you on do you think they go Horford or they go Robert Williams?
I think they're going to start off with Horford just to preserve Robert Williams and his knee. And the funny thing about that is Horford's the guy that's like, what, 37, 38 years old. And Williams is the young cat there. But Williams has had trouble staying healthy. Horford really hasn't lost a step, maybe a half step over the last couple of years. He's still good defender, understands what's going on, very high IQ on the court, a good solid foundation guy to have with all those Tatums and Jaylen Browns and Derek White's running around him. So I think that's a smart way to start the season. I would like to see Time Lord be able to stay healthy and take over that starting job and really showcase his talent, because I think, man, if we could get 32 minutes of Time Lord a night, it would be really fun. But he just hasn't been able to stay healthy and stay out of foul trouble enough to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll go with Horford and just ease Williams in and give him sort of 22 minutes off the bench because they want him for the playoffs. That's where they need him. With Horford starting, he probably won't play starters minutes necessarily. He might be 26 minutes. Is he someone you would target in drafts at all? He wasn't great last season, but he wasn't terrible, and he does do a bit of everything. So would you consider him or happy to grab someone with more upside?
I'm probably not going to mess with Horford this year. I mean, I think in reality he's a good anchor for that team, but in fantasy, I just don't see him. I mean, the age is going to catch up with him at some point, and it's probably going to be this year. The guy that's most intriguing in that whole lineup, though, is Derek White, because Marcus Smart's gone. Derek White looked good in the playoffs. Derek White had an incredible February for Boston. Played in all 82 games for them last year. Averaged 12 points, 4 assists, like nothing mind-blowing. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of hype building around Derek White this year. I'm a little worried about his shooting percentage. He shot it really well last year. I think he's going to fall back a little bit shooting it wise this year. But the opportunity is there. And, man, when he is on and when he's got it cooking, Derek White's really fun. I think there's going to be hype around Derek White this year. I think there's going to be fantasy managers are going to feel the need or the push to want to go draft him a little earlier than they should. I'm not sure he's worth reaching for, but maybe he will be. I think Derek White is going to be kind of a fun player this year.
Yeah, the hype's already started with him. I know in the breakout and hot take, both those roundtable articles that I did, Derek White was featured as a potential top 50 player. So I feel like he's going to get hyped up a little bit by certain analysts, and which could lead to him being sort of overvalued a little bit. So he might be going too early in drafts once we get closer to October. But I'd be happy to grab him.
I think one thing about White is he does not turn the ball over at all. Like he turned over 1.2 times in 82 games last year. So if you're building a team that doesn't turn the ball over, then Derek White's value goes up quite a bit.
It does. Yeah, it does. And as you said, his percentages, much like Trae Young, are sort of maybe going to be the measuring stick for his overall value, because he was 46% last year. The 2 previous years, he was 42 and 41. Year before that, he was 46. So which is he? Is he 46 or is he 42? 46, he's probably a top 70, top 60 player. 42%, he probably drops back to be sort of top 90. On to Brooklyn. A few questions here as well. I've got Dinwiddie, McCall Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton as my starters, with Ben Simmons, Dennis Smith Jr. and Royce O'Neal as potential starters, other guys that warrant discussion. Is that starting five who you think they will go with?
It is. I can see O'Neal sneaking in there. But Cam Johnson feels like he's arrived. Maybe Dorian Finney-Smith and O'Neal timeshare. I'm not sure there, but man, Mikal Bridges was really, really fun last season. Really came into his own getting out of Phoenix. Dinwiddie has had a career resurgence. Everybody kind of wrote the Nets off last year, but they just kept playing well and kind of surprising people. I don't know that this team is going to shock the world or anything, but I think Mikal Bridges is going to be a guy that a lot of fantasy managers want to try to get on their team.
Could you see a world? I don't think it happens, but could you see them potentially moving Simmons into the starting lineup, starting him alongside Dinwiddie with Bridges at the 3, Johnson at the 4, and Claxton at the 5? I'm not sure it happens, and I'm probably being an optimist because Ben Simmons is Australian potentially. But I don't know. Could you see that happening?
5 years ago, yeah, dude, I'm all in.
Yes.
Yeah, that is absolutely going to happen. Simmons is going to start. He's going to live up to all the hype, and it's going to be all gravy and rainbows and unicorns and everything else. But from what I've seen from Ben Simmons and what we've all seen, I find it hard to believe that any NBA team is going to trust that guy with the keys at this point. But let's say Simmons comes in and has a great camp. He's got a totally revitalized attitude. He's completely dialed in. He's back to the rookie of the year, all the defense, triple-double capabilities. It's certainly possible, but I wouldn't bet more than a 6-pack of Miller Lite on that.
I have no idea how much that costs over there, but I'm assuming it's not very much.
About $5.
Okay, so not much. And just one guy quickly before we move to the next team, Dennis Smith Jr., coming off a pretty good season in Charlotte last year, had to deal with some injuries, but when he was on the court, great defensively, can get some assists, should play a role on this team, backing up Dinwiddie, backing up Simmons, I suppose, potentially. I don't think I'm drafting him, but I would certainly keep him on my watch list just in case of an injury or for streaming purposes. Do you think he sees a decent enough role to have some value at times throughout the season?
I do. DSJ is one of those guys where I was high on him for a little bit, and then he went away, and then he somehow came back, and then he was sort of hot, and then he went away, and then he came back. He just keeps bouncing in and out of these value trends. And, it's only going to take a sprained ankle from Dinwiddie to make Dennis Smith Jr. one of the hottest pickups in fantasy hoops. So I would not rule out me drafting DSJ at the end of one or two of my drafts.
Yeah. I think, and on to his former team here, the Charlotte Hornets. I've gone with LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams as my starters. A few question marks here as well. Ball and Rozier, I think they're locked in. Williams is locked in. It's those forward positions that warrant probably a bit of discussion. I've got Brandon Miller, Caleb Martin, pretty sure he's the Charlotte Martin, and PJ Washington, who hasn't yet re-signed with Charlotte. So I've just put him in there, but we don't actually know where he's going. Do you think Hayward starts for this team?
We have new ownership. Hayward is old. How old is Hayward? Do you have it pulled up in front of you by chance?
No, but
I think he's like 33. I don't know if you ever watched
33. Yes, 33.
Oh man, I nailed it. I don't know if you ever watched Stroup and I do Roundball Stew, but man, we would always have this game of I would try to guess how old the guy was, and I was usually off by about 8 years. But I was totally dialed in on Gordon Hayward being old.
Yep.
also banged up, history of injuries. I think Hayward is starting as long as he's healthy, but who knows how long that'll be. And as soon as Hayward goes down, I think it's Brandon Miller time. The fact that Miles Bridges is back probably makes PJ Washington an afterthought, especially when you combine in the promise that we saw from Mark Williams last year. He looked pretty good. So I think they're going to let the kids play. I also think you have to be a little bit wary of Terry Rozier because he went most of last season without LaMelo Ball around. So he was handling the ball most of the time, had the ball in his hands way more than he will this year. Streaky shooter. I'm not all that high on Rozier going in, but I think Hayward could be a nice little mid-round sleeper if he can stay healthy this year.
Yeah, Rosie is an interesting one. So he's 29. Just pulled up his numbers. As you said, last season he played without LaMelo Ball for the bulk of the season. He ended as the 97th ranked player. Prior to that, the 2 years before that, he was top 40 in both seasons. And looking at his numbers across the board, they're pretty identical to what he did last season. His assists were up slightly without LaMelo, obviously. But again, he's one of those guys, it's going to come down to percentages. The 2 years he was top 40, he shot close to 45%. Last year, he was back down near 41%. So potentially with LaMelo back, he doesn't handle the ball as much, but does he get better looks? Does his efficiency go back up? And if so, if the Hornets are going to push for the playoffs, maybe Rozier could be a sneaky guy. He's probably available sort of in the 80s in a lot of spots, and he could break into the top 50 again if things fall his way.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising that, to me anyway, because I wrote him up for RotoWire. He was third round the year before last, and then last year he was ninth round. Even though he averaged a career high in points and assists last season, his value dropped by 6 rounds. And it, like you said, it's all tied to percentages. He doesn't block shots. He doesn't get a lot of steals. So he's an interesting guy, but I feel much better about getting Rozier in like round 6 or 7 than I do round 3 or 4.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think,
and he'll be 30 in February, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So on to the Bulls. Again, few questions here. Outside of a few players that are locked in, I've gone with Javon Carter as the starting point guard. Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic. And then I've just put down the bottom there, Kobe White, Alex Caruso. LaVine, DeRozan, Vucevic, probably Williams, I think are all locked in as 4 of the starters. It's the point guard spot that we're not sure about. Do you think it's Carter, or do you think they go with someone who's been there a little bit longer like Caruso?
That's a great question. And before Caruso got hurt, he was playing really well and putting up pretty solid fantasy stats across the board. I think Javon Carter is the starter for them, but it would not surprise me if Caruso ends up in there at some point.
Would you draft any of those 3, Carter, White, Caruso, in a standard league? Are you leaning one over the other, or you just sort of leave all of them for someone else?
I liked using Carter in FanDuel and DFS lineups when Chris Middleton was hurt for the Bucks, when he was with the Bucks. But as far as drafting him as one of my main cogs in a fantasy league, I don't think I could do it, especially with LaVine, DeRozan. Williams should take a step forward this year. You got the Caruso and White thing. That's a 3-headed point guard monster any way you slice it up. So I don't think I'm going to mess. I mean, I'll do a late round flyer on Javon Carter, but I'm not going to do anything crazy.
No. Cavaliers. probably one spot again that we're not sure of. I've got Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell as the starting backcourt. I've gone with Max Strus at the 3, Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, with Levert, Okoro, and Niang as my fringe sort of, what do we do with these guys? I think the backcourt is set. We know Garland and Mitchell. We know who they are. Much like Mobley and Allen, I think Mobley is probably going to be a guy that people may look at as a breakout star this season. The small forward spot, do you think it's Max Strus's, or will they go with Isaac Okoro, who honestly didn't really do much last year as the starting small forward?
And I don't think you can rule Karis LeVert out of there either.
Yep.
You know, LeVert's coming back from huge history of injuries. Right before that weird ailment he had where it looked like it could possibly end his career, he looked like a breakout star in the making, and like he was coming. So I'm not ready to rule Karis LeVert out of anything yet. Now, since he's been back and since he's been healthy, he really hasn't done much to turn heads and hasn't really got me excited. But I'm also not forgetting about him. I would not be shocked if LeVert starts over Strus.
He very well could. I think it depends. For me, I guess Strus adds that the perimeter threat. I don't mind LeVert off the bench running as that sort of secondary point guard. He's a decent assist guy. But, yeah, I'm not sure which way they're going to go. I don't think it'll be a Okoro. For me, I think he's had his time. They've tried him. He hasn't done anything. Kevin Love, I could have had on here as well, but I don't think he's going to feature enough to warrant sort of any real fantasy attention. So if Strus is starting and they sort of say, okay, Strus, you can go with this, you're getting 30 minutes a night, is he draftable?
I mean, as far as fantasy goes for Strus, I just feel like I'm not looking at his numbers right now, but I just feel like he is a 3-point specialist, and that's what he does. But I also feel like he's a way better fit for them than Okoro was. I could see Strus and LeVert splitting those minutes right down the middle. And maybe Strus shocks the world this year, comes out and plays really well, has a Tyler Hero type season. But it'll be interesting to watch. I think that's a good training camp battle to watch between Strus and LeVert.
Yeah, I agree. Onto the Pistons now. And this team is, God, who knows what they're going to do. I've gone with Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham as the backcourt, Asar Thompson, Bojan Bogdanovic, had to think about that, and Jalen Duren as my starters. And then, they've got a few fringe guys. We don't know what their roles are going to be. Killian Hayes, James Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart, Marvin Bagley. Firstly, I guess, do you think they will be the 5 starters for Detroit?
Man, I have no idea. Like you said, who knows what Detroit is going to do. I think Ivey's starting, Cunningham starting. The rest of it is totally up in the air. James Wiseman, they played him a lot down the stretch last season. And James Wiseman is a former number, 2, 3 pick?
Was he 1?
Was he 1? I know he was high.
Yeah, I have no idea. Pick 2. Okay, round 1, pick 2.
Pick 2. So you've got him. You've got Beef Stewart, who has also shown flashes of being very good. You got Marvin Bagley, who got picked in front of Luka and Trey in that mix. Like, there's a lot of untapped potential young talent on that Pistons secondary group. And I don't know. I kind of feel like Jalen Duren is going to be the guy on opening night, but I don't know how long he's going to be in there. I kind of feel like they like Wiseman, and I kind of feel like they're going to roll with Wiseman at center. And it's also possible that they go with Beef Stew or Duran at power forward. Like they have a lot of options. They have Marvin Bagley also that can play power forward. So I don't know what's going to happen in Detroit, man, and I don't know how you plan for any of that fantasy wise.
It's tough unless they come out and say this is our starter or give us some indication as to what players' roles are going to look like. It is hard outside of, I think Ivy and Cunningham, I think they're both going to get starters minutes. I don't think we need to worry too much about them. But beyond that, I mean, Bogdanovic was pretty good last year, but he was playing without Cunningham. He's probably someone who's likely to be traded at some point because he doesn't really fit their timeline. Thompson, I think they just have to give him minutes. I mean, the fact they have a better coach now, that gives me some hope that they will make the right decisions. But it is still Detroit. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. On to the Pacers. So we chatted about Indiana earlier. A really fun lineup, I think. But a couple of questions again. Halliburton, he'll start undoubtedly. I've gone with Bruce Brown, Buddy Hield, Obi Toppin, and Miles Turner. But we've got Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, and Isaiah Jackson as names to consider. I mean, Jackson's not going to start. I'm just more curious about what you think his role might be. But do you think they go with Brown as a starter? Does Toppin start over Jarris Walker? Any thoughts there?
I mean, there was a lot of hype around Isaiah Jackson not that long ago. And he filled in when guys got hurt. So I mean, I don't know that it's a lock that Obi Toppin is going to start for them. I feel like he is going to start. I agree with you on that. I just don't know how locked in he is to that starting job. And is Jalen Smith is still there too, right?
Yeah.
And last year at this time, or a little bit after this time, the Pacers came out and they said Jalen Smith's going to be our starting power forward. Me and my Roto World boys got all fired up, and we're like, "Oh, we're on the Jalen Smith bandwagon. Here it comes." But he's still there. So between Jalen Smith and Jackson and Toppin, I don't know what's going to happen there. I think the Bruce Brown signing is good for the Pacers in real life. I think Bruce Brown's going to be a pretty serviceable fantasy player. I don't think you need to reach for him, but it's going to be pretty good. But Benedict Mathurin had a really good year last year and is a really good player. And I'm worried about how far back Bruce Brown is going to set him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with Brown, he's obviously played primarily as a sixth man throughout his whole career, and he was really good for the Nuggets. And potentially it makes sense from a lot of perspectives to bring him in as the sixth man and start Benedict Mathurin. But they paid Brown a lot of money. So I'm just not sure you're paying a sixth man that much. So it will be interesting. I'm pretty high on Obi Toppin. I think he could have a really nice season if he does the opposite of what Jalen Smith did and he starts at the power forward and actually earns his spot, plays well, because Jalen Smith didn't do that and eventually fell out of the rotation. So I think if Toppin can play well, he is someone that I like late in drafts this season.
Yeah, I'm
onto
with
Miami.
you on that.
Onto Miami, I haven't put Damian Lillard in here because we don't know if he's going to be here. So I've gone with the rosters as they sit at the moment. Kyle Lowry, I've got as the starting point guard, really because they just have no one else at the moment. Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Cody Martin, Bam Adebayo. Something I did consider, I don't know if they do it, but I was looking through their roster, and I know down the stretch last season they were starting Gabe Vincent over Kyle Lowry, bringing Kyle Lowry off the bench, playing him. His minutes were up and down, but 24, 28 minutes, sometimes 30. We know he's old. We know he's injury prone. Do you think Josh Richardson could start in there somewhere? Do they start him alongside Hero and Butler? Because both of those guys can handle the ball. I just looked at it and I thought Richardson, he can handle the ball as well. He's decent. in terms of assists, a good defender. Do they look to start him or do they go with Lowry?
Well, right now, ESPN has Tyler Hero as the starting point guard in Miami, with Josh Richardson starting at shooting guard. So
okay,
that right there, I don't know that I disagree with that, because the last thing I'm doing at this point is starting Kyle Lowry. But like you said, Lillard is probably on his way to Miami. We don't know when, we don't know how, but it feels like it's going to happen. And once that happens, then Tyler Hero starting at point guard goes out the window, obviously. Yep. But if Hero and Lowry are there at the start of the season, I'm starting Hero over Lowry. I am not messing with Kyle Lowry again this year. He missed all those games with personal stuff last year. He's, like you said, he's old. Josh Richardson, though, I mean, I've always been a Josh Richardson guy, and he's never really lived up to the hype. I doubt he's going to be a big factor this year. I think we just have to pretend that Lillard is in Miami. And then you're looking at Lillard, Hero, Butler, Martin, and Bam. And then the rest of it's just an afterthought.
Yeah, and I've got Kevin Love here. I don't know why I talked about him in Cleveland. I guess I'm stuck 5 years ago. But obviously he's still in Miami, but not a fantasy guy. I threw in Orlando Robinson here. He was good in Summer League. I think he's flashed. I think it doesn't really warrant much discussion. I don't think he's someone we're drafting. But I would just keep an eye on him if Bam gets injured throughout the season. If Robinson does establish himself as the backup center, I think he has a really nice fantasy game. So really just someone to keep an eye on.
Well, I think Caleb Martin is worth keeping an eye on and might be worth a late round flyer in fantasy drafts, because we know Jimmy Butler is going to miss time. We know he's going to miss games. We know Kevin Love is going to miss games. We know Kyle Lowry is going to miss games. And Caleb Martin last year was sort of a glue guy that held that team together for long stretches when they were missing players. So I think Martin is worth a look late in drafts.
He could very well be. On to the Bucks now. I think this lineup is pretty set. Drew Holiday, Grayson Allen, Chris Middleton, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Brook Lopez. The only sort of guy I considered putting in here was putting in Malik Beasley instead of Grayson Allen, but I think they're going to want Beasley off the bench to provide them with some scoring. I just feel like in the starting lineup, he'd be a little bit wasted because they've got Giannis, they've got Chris Middleton, they've got Drew Holiday. They can all score, whereas their bench, they don't really have any sort of volume scorers. So I like Beasley there. Do you think this is who they go with on opening night, assuming they're all healthy?
Yep. That looks like the right lineup. I think Middleton has a bounce back. I think Lopez probably falls a little bit. He can't keep doing this forever. The rest of it, it looks good to me.
Nice and easy with the Bucks. Onto the Knicks. A few more discussion points here. I've gone Jalen Brunson, Quentin Grimes, Josh Hart, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson. But I think you could probably make a case for three of these next four guys to start. Emmanuel Quickley, Dante DiVincenzo, RJ Barrett, Isaiah Hartenstein. I think outside of Brunson, Randle, Robinson, they're set as the starters. But you could play DiVincenzo at the 2. You could play Quickley at the 2, Barrett at the 3, Hart at the 2 with Barrett. I'm not sure what they're going to do here. Any thoughts on whether you think I might have this wrong and they might start one of these other guys?
It feels weird to me to not see RJ Barrett in that starting lineup. I don't know exactly. Does he start over Quentin Grimes? Does Josh Hart come off the bench? You know Randall's going to be out there. I could see RJ Barrett starting over Quentin Grimes. Does it matter who starts there? Maybe. And even when RJ Barrett is playing really well, he's still kind of a fantasy liability, right? Like he's one of those guys where he'll go out and score 25. You're like, oh man, I need to go pick him up. And then you look at it and you're like, I can't really tell this. Does he help my team or does he hurt my team? I can't even really figure it out. But I could see RJ Barrett starting over Grimes, at least to start the season. Maybe that changes once they're into it a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if Barrett's starting.
Yeah, I think that could be the case, certainly. I could see Hart coming off the bench as well. Like he's a little bit like a Bruce Brown kind of guy that you could just plug in anywhere as a sixth man to fill a number of spots. So yeah, I'm not 100% on this starting lineup for the Knicks. A little bit of movement that could happen, much like Orlando. I've gone with Fultz, Gary Harris, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter as my starters. But then they've got a range of other guys there. They're quite deep now. Anthony Black, Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, Jonathan Isaac, Joe Ingles. Probably the obvious sort of question there is, does Harris start or does Suggs start? I think they go with Harris probably just because of his floor spacing. Suggs is not there yet as a shooter and Fultz is not a shooter. So I think they will look to get some floor spacing and Harris sort of gives them a nice veteran piece in that starting lineup. Do you think he starts or do you think they'll go with one of these younger options?
Well, it is Orlando, so anything is possible. I think we're all kind of excited to see Fultz. Gary Harris, man, I don't understand. I don't really know what the point is of running him out there when you have all these young kids that need to play. So I kind of feel like Harris won't be in there, but I'm not really sure who will be instead. There's a lot of names in that lower half that certainly work there.
I think Suggs is probably their long-term guy. I think that's who they view, hopefully, as the starter alongside Fultz. But he's been a bit inefficient to this point. He's a good defender. He's shown that. Jonathan Isaac, we know his history. We know everything with the injuries and played 11 games last season. Are you taking him in fantasy? Like he's supposedly healthy, ready to go. He flashed last season, but his minutes were so limited that it's hard to take a lot away from what he did. But would you consider him just last round? He's sitting there. I'm going to grab him and see if he's getting 20, 22 minutes a night. Then we know what he can do when he's on the court.
Yeah, I think we've all been suckered by Jonathan Isaac in the past. And like, ooh, I'm going to take a last round flyer on him and see what happens. I'm going to stash him and wait. And we've been waiting for 4 years. So yes, this year, now that he is actually healthy and we've actually seen him play in some basketball games, there is a little hope, a little light at the end of the tunnel. I could see myself possibly. No, I'm not messing with Jonathan Isaac, man. Paolo Banchero's there. Wendell Carter Jr.'s there. I'm not doing it. I'm done.
Okay. All right. So it's a no on Jonathan Isaac.
Nope, it's over.
No.
By the way, RJ Barrett last year, I just had to look it up.
Yep.
25th round fantasy value. Played 73 games, scored almost 20 points a game. But he just does nothing else besides score.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Grimes, you may have that one right.
Yeah, I think Barrett, I mean, he's still only 23, so he's still young, but, I mean, how long do you say someone is young? He's been in the league for 4 years now. He came in the Zion draft, so he's been around for a while, and it's how much more time do you give him before you just say this is who he is, and he can just be a scorer like a Harrison Barnes or someone like that. So, yeah, we'll see. 76ers now, and I've included James Harden because he is still technically in Philadelphia, but chances are he won't be. But I've gone with Harden, Maxey, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, Joel Embiid. So basically the same starting lineup they had last season. D'Anthony Melton, he was good last season. He got some good opportunity with injuries to Harden and Maxey. Pat Beverly is there now. Not sure where he fits. I think until we know where Harden goes, you're not drafting him, obviously, but can have some streaming value. Paul Reed is the guy I probably want to talk about there. Montrezl Harrell re-signed and then blew out his knee, so he's out for the year. If Paul Reed plays purely as the backup behind Joel Embiid, he's obviously not going to get a ton of minutes, but if he can get 16 to 18 minutes, do you think he's someone to... I don't think you'd draft him in standard leagues, but slightly deeper leagues, would you consider him?
I'm intrigued by Paul Reed, just like I am every other year, but I'm probably not drafting him. The guy I like out of that bottom bunch is D'Anthony Melton. I think Melton's got a chance to really be special. He's a fantasy stat stuffer across the board, way more so than those other two guys. I think Reed is intriguing. Like, he's worth a look. Man, there's just not a lot to love about that Philly lineup, man.
No.
I love Maxey, but Tobias Harris is getting old. He's misses a lot of layups, does some weird things around the glass. PJ Tucker would rather eat popcorn with a kid in the front row than shoot the ball. Reed has shown some flashes, but he's never really stepped it up. You got Pat Beverly, everybody's favorite player to hate unless he's on your team. What a weird stack they've got going in Philly.
It is. And they've got Mo Bamba as well now. So, I mean, throw him into the mix somewhere. I don't know where he fits at all, if he plays at all. So, yeah, look, I think we need to really wait on Philly to see what happens with the Harden deal, because if he's moved, who knows who they bring back. So, yeah, hard to know a lot about Philly. On to the Raptors now. Another little question here. I've gone with Dennis Schroeder as the starting point guard with Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and Jakob Poeltl. And then some other guys I threw in there, Gary Trent, Grady Dick, Otto Porter Jr., and Chris Boucher. I don't know. I think 4 of those guys start definitely, assuming Siakam is still in Toronto. We're still hearing trade rumors about him potentially moving on. But at the moment, I think those 4 all start. It's that point guard position. Do they start Dennis Schroeder, or do they just run through Scotty Barnes and bring Gary Trent into the starting lineup? What do you think they're going to do?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I mean, I would like to see Scotty Barnes get it. Dennis Schroeder reminds me of the player we were talking about earlier, Dennis Smith Jr. Like, oh, Dennis Schroeder's here, and he's starting. Oh, he just got traded, and now we're never going to hear from him again. Oh, wait, now Dennis Schroeder's starting, and he's effective. Like, who knows what Schroeder's going to do? I would rather see them just give the ball to Scotty Barnes and be done with it. Feels to me like Gary Trent should be starting. I just don't know exactly how that happens, but he'd be a really effective sixth man, you know. And then also just for the fun of it, Chris Boucher is going to be 31 years old in January. So congratulations, Raptors, for wasting his entire career.
Yeah, I just put him there because he's one of those guys that people talk about every year.
He's my guy. It's my guy. But he's 31. It's over. Like, they did it. You finally did it.
Mission accomplished. All right, the last team, and probably the one that has, a new-looking roster in a lot of respects. Tyus Jones, Jordan Poole, Denny Avdiar, Kyle Kuzma, Dan Gafford are the starters I've gone with there. And I think that's who they go with. And then I've just put DeLon Wright, Corey Kispert, and Danilo Gallinari down the bottom there. we know like Poole is being hyped already, top 50 kind of guy, potentially. Tyus Jones finally starting top 80, potentially. Denny Avdia, I like him this season as a later round guy. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, and there's people hyping up Denny Avdija already. You see it on Twitter. Some of you and our friends and our colleagues are hyping up Denny Avdija. I've been a Denny guy for 3 years, so I get it. Kyle Kuzma's a good player. Gafford, great shot blocker, solid center. Kispert, I think, is very interesting on that team. But yeah, between Tyus Jones, Poole, Avdija, there's going to be a lot of hype train. There's going to be like Washington's going to be one of those teams where their players are going to be on a lot of fantasy teams and their record is going to be terrible.
Yeah, I think you could almost say that the entire starting five are hype guys. I think they're all guys that people are going to be talking about. Kuzma's probably the one there that potentially doesn't fall into that bucket, but you could also say that without Porzingis and without Beal, he's going to take on more of a scoring role. So,
which he is, and we saw how good Kyle Kuzma was 2 years ago. Like he kind of balled out.
Yeah, yep. No, he certainly proved a lot of people wrong, I think, since he arrived in Washington. DeLon Wright last season was a bit of a surprise to many. He played good minutes, did struggle with a bit of an injury there, but he led. I don't think he led the league in steals, but he was certainly top 5 in the league in steals. Do you think there's still a role for him here somewhere that warrants fantasy attention?
DeLon Wright?
Yeah.
Is that who you're asking? I didn't really get on board with him last year. I kind of ignored it. Maybe that was an error on my part, but I just couldn't believe it was happening. I don't have a lot of faith in DeLon Wright, even in Washington, but I mean, there's going to be opportunity there for him. So I'm probably not drafting him, but I will put him on my watch list.
Yeah, I don't think we're drafting him, but just if you do need steals, if he's playing 20 minutes a night, he could get you 1.4, 1.5 steals quite easily. So someone to just tuck away there for an emergency.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end then of all the Eastern Conference starting lineups or possible starting lineups. We'll move on to the Western Conference next week. Beyond that, I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll find something.
We keep talking about, well, the season's still 2 months away, but after 2 weeks, it's going to be 6 weeks away. And then after those 2 weeks, it's going to be a month away. And by then drafts are going to be happening. We're going to have probably more to talk about than we even can think of.
Well, I think so. And I mean, the Lillard, Harden trades, Siakam potentially, they're going to happen maybe. It could happen any day in the next 6 weeks. They could happen. That might give us something to talk about. But, look, we'll find stuff. There's always...
It's going to be here before we know it.
It will. I'm going to let you go because it's late there. I'm going to go and have lunch. Any final thoughts on those starting lineups? Anything you want to point out that we might have missed?
No, bring on the Washington Wizards guards. Like let's do that. I'm ready. I'm going to draft Tyus Jones a lot.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how high he gets hyped. If you're doing drafts now, it's a good time to get some of these guys because in 6 weeks, 4 weeks time, they could have jumped up a round or two in terms of ADP. So that will do it for today's show. Remember, you can check out all of our content at fbibasketball.com. We're still running out draft-only leagues. I think B-Dub's still doing those. We've got our roundtable article coming out every week. You can follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. We would love it if you could give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. We're slowly building the numbers. Heading into the next season would be good if we can get to 1,000. That'd be a good number. But until next time, catch up.
You just listened to another episode from the Fantasy Basketball International Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us. And for more information about joining our community, please check out our website at fbibasketball.com.